Welcome to the Unconventional Path, entrepreneurship and innovation stories and ideas. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, today's guest on the podcast is Luka Yancopoulos. Luka founded Grapevine. Grapevine is a company that's helping doctors' offices save money by taking most of the work and worry out of supply chain management.
Hey, this sounds really interesting, Bela, and I love this kind of interview, right? People with kind of an interesting vision, and especially something like this. And it's essentially, I think, a B2B idea, right? And it's helping other small business owners solve their problems with ordering supplies. Listeners, I think there's lots to pay attention to here about exploring a problem that's kind of right in your face, and creating a solution that solves those problems. And I think listeners might be a little surprised at how old and experienced this entrepreneur is, and it might lead to some interesting conclusions at the end. So without further ado, let's get right to the interview with Luka Yancopoulos.
Hello, Luka. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey there. Thanks for having me, and I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, excellent. So you started a company out of college, was that correct?
I actually started it in college, where me and some of my dorm room buddies were on a brief sort of COVID-driven hiatus from class and school. We were quarantining up in our dorm rooms and had nothing but our minds and each other to sort of think through, and a lot of very obvious, very clear problems. So we sort of got to work and became entrepreneurs out of, a moment of quarantining and global strife.
Yeah. And where'd you go to school?
I was at University of Pennsylvania. I went to University of Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. Penn. Very nice.
Yeah, Penn.
So tell us a little bit about Grapevine, the company, what it does.
For sure. Yeah. So Grapevine's a cutting edge software that creates time for medical doctors while cutting costs of patient care. And I don't consider it a solution just for healthcare businesses. I think it's a solution for everyone, because at some point in our lives, we all become patients, and costs of healthcare here in the US are high. And that's exactly what we're addressing, and accessing better quality of healthcare, and getting more out of the healthcare providers you see, and doing that all for a lower price point and a lower bill at the end of the day.
So let's drill down in that a little bit. What sort of specific ways do you help physicians and patients?
Yeah, sure. So today we primarily work with the physicians and with the actual medical practices. We help them with their supply chain. We think it's important to let doctors and nurses spend their time and energy on patient care and driving the best possible patient outcomes. And unfortunately, my mom's a nurse, actually. My dad's a doctor. They spend huge amounts of time managing the different parts of their business, specifically supply chains, right? Every time they see a patient, they're using needles, lab coats, gloves, masks, medications, IV solutions. I mean, the list goes on, implants when they're performing a surgery. And a good chunk of their day and their people's day is spent on sort of finding these different supplies, reordering the thousands of unique products that they need to operate and practice medicine, making sure it's in stock, making sure it's not expired, and doing all of that at the lowest possible dollar. Because those costs, those gloves, those needles that are used for patient care get packed into the medical bills that patients ultimately see and patients ultimately pay. These are businesses. They need to break even. They need to cover their costs. And a huge part of their sort of expenses and costs are sort of supply chain related drugs, devices, supplies. And the way that Grapevine actually sort of solves this problem for these people is through a software interface. The medical practice, the office manager, they'll log in, sign up for Grapevine. It's totally free to use. They'll link their different suppliers. So the different, websites that they already use, they simply plug in their credentials, and we go out, we gather all of the information in an instant from each of their suppliers, their contract negotiated prices, stock availabilities, read in that data and put it all sort of in one shopping screen. And we analyze their, not only their prices and the availability of the products, but we also look at the sort of behavior and patterns of how much they use, how frequently they place orders for these different things to their different locations or clinics. And we turn their sort of supply chain on autopilot. So they add to cart their usual product, and we already know exactly what they're going to add to cart. So we construct their carts for them. We make sure that even if they usually shop from supplier number one, you could think about yourself walking into CVS. You walk into CVS and you might see a product that you're going to buy. Dwayne Reed or Rite Aid might have the same product at a lower cost. So as we build their carts, we look for savings opportunities by sort of switching to a different source, reconstruct their spend and diversify their spend amongst a broader network of suppliers that's able to service them, all without the doctor or medical practitioners, shopping or spending any time placing orders, and ensuring that they're getting things at the lowest possible price. And we've been impressively capable of lowering these medical practices' spend on supplies by more than 60%, saving individual medical practices more than $2 million a year, which is really, really crazy. And doing all of that without a shopper logging on to a website or dealing with a sales rep or an account manager placing orders. That concept has sort of been dissolved.
So how do you sort of interface that to inventory management within the practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something that we're developing now. The idea, it's funny, right? When I'm saying the words like shop and like add to cart, right? Those things, those concepts, right? You and I can relate to them. Maybe we use Amazon, and they come from a real part of ours as a consumer, our real lives. I still go to the store, I grab a cart, I roll it down the aisles, I find things, I add them to my cart, and then I go to checkout and I pay for things, right? These medical practices, there is no cart. There has never been a cart, and there has never been a checkout, right? They've always, like you said, looked in their supply cabinet, found things that are missing or not found things, right? And then basically requested that the supply cabinet gets filled back up. And today, unfortunately, they've adapted to the weird sort of consumer e-commerce experience of add to cart and checkout. It doesn't make much sense. So we're working on a mobile app that is going to sort of sit in their pocket, sit in the palm of their hand, and during patient care, during a patient appointment, and the moment they open that supply cabinet, they're capable of actually saying, oh, something isn't here that I need here. We're running low on this or that. That's all they need to do to sort of train. We don't care if there's 17 units or 14 units. We care if they need more. And if they need more, right, that can either be transitioned from another location within their practice by an office manager type of person, move from place A to place B within the practice, replenishing the supply cabinet, or it can be redirected and sent to, an out of office supplier who can sort of restock their supply cabinet for them. But doing it, while they're on their feet, in the moment they realize that they have a need for supply, we hope to bypass the whole need of tracking your inventory, knowing exactly what's in there, and instead just connect your supply cabinet directly to the places where you can refill it.
Right. Got it. So this notion of managing the stuff I have in my building, right? My consumable, the things that I use up in my business, whether it be a medical practice or whether it be some manufacturing business, right? That problem's been around a long time. And people have tried to come up with various different systems to sort of manage that in an effective, efficient way. What makes Grapevine different?
I think that's a very good question. For one, it's highly tuned for the medical setting, and there are very important differences, related to the products you use, the compliance laws, preservation of quality of the supplies that you're using in a medical setting, that we've had to navigate and build tools for. I think that more importantly, we're in an age of unprecedented sort of technological tools that allow for humans or computers to study patterns, right, in behavior, in purchasing, in spend, aggregate information, right, from different sources. And when you combine those two things, you create a perfect playing field for AI to take on some of the workload of the human being. A lot of softwares have been built to work, or tools have been built to work alongside people, to enable people to move faster. But that's not what's going on here. We believe that medical practices should practice medicine and nothing more. That's what they're trained at, and they shouldn't have to deal with supply and purchasing. Maybe that's a good part of other businesses, but it's not a productive part of these businesses. And it's something that every person in those offices believes is a waste of time and a waste of energy. And again, not the focus or what they've been trained at. So as much as we can, automate these processes, liberate them from the burden of operating a business, and help focus them on practicing medicine. I mean, that's how you improve the quality of medicine, not just from the doctor, but for the patient.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. Understand. So what's sort of if you had to describe your ideal customer, how would you describe them?
I mean, yeah, ideal as far as impact, right, is one way to sort of think about it. The customers who have the most to gain sort of by working with us. And that's generally how I try to think is, we're an impact sort of first company. But then there's also ideals related to, they're the easiest, for us to work with based on our current sort of tech stack and whatnot. But yeah, I guess our priorities being impact. The ideal customer, the ones who can derive the most value from a Grapevine-like system, are medical practices or businesses that, out of convenience, rely on one supplier, right? And the idea is that when you work with one supplier, when you only go into one store as a consumer, you're basically giving that store, that supplier, a monopoly on your spend. They can charge whatever they want to charge. And if you're not going to look in another store, then there's no way you're going to buy it from anyone else. They charge whatever they want and you're going to pay it. And that's not, competition and free market capitalism at its finest. The reason that these are sort of ideal businesses, or they have the most to gain by using Grapevine, is those people are unfortunately overspending a lot because they've handed a monopoly to a supplier that they already work with. So by plugging into Grapevine, they're able to, one-click unlock new stores, take what was CVS and combine those CVS aisles with those of Duane Reade, Rite Aid, so on, and make sure that when they grab one thing off the shelf, another thing, from the other store sort of slides into their cart instead. So it gives us an opportunity to optimize prices, to create competition where it didn't previously exist, in a way that's really important in our capitalist sort of ecosystem that exists, and helps people get the most out of the world that we actually live in.
Yeah. So as you think of medical practices, they come in all sizes and flavors. There's the solo practitioner, and then there's the 100 physician medical group. Where in that spectrum is sort of your sweet spot?
Yeah. Typically the size doesn't matter up until a certain point. So basically large hospital groups, that have locations all the way from Manhattan to the edge of Long Island and upstate New York, the New York Presbyterians of the world. I think everyone probably has an idea of what I'm talking about. Those guys aren't great for Grapevine. And the reason is they've got hundreds, if not thousands, of procurement employees. Those employees either use like an in-house self-built system, or have been trained and retrained on some sort of third-party customized software stack like Oracle's NetSuite or something along these lines, right? That makes them not ideal, in that they have a high sort of barrier to entry, or a high amount of resistance to change. The smaller businesses, but I'm not talking about like mom and pop practices. Yeah, those guys are great for us, and they often do not have, dozens of procurement personnel to optimize supply chains and whatnot. They're great for us, the mom and pop sort of single location medical practice, but all the way up to, we have, public companies that are, for example, the Oncology Institute of Hope and Innovation. They have 100 locations nationwide. They do cancer research and cancer treatment, and they're saving more than 60% on their medical supplies, and they've saved a couple $1 million this year. So it's more about, I guess, the willingness to adopt change and the existing sort of infrastructure, whether it's people or software related to procurement, that makes a business ideal for us a little less size. But those sort of changes, there are patterns in the way that the business operates, the people they have, the softwares they use. At a certain scale, they're almost all sort of using some other systems.
Yeah.
To try to replicate what we're doing.
Very nice. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk more about the business and the creation of the business and sort of the entrepreneurial aspects of this. So when did you start the business?
Yeah, started the business in 2020, spring 2020.
Yeah. And what's your capitalization? You venture backed or self-funded, or how does that part work?
Yeah, so so it was a part A and part B evolution of this business. We had like an immediate response to the COVID pandemic and the supply chain disruption that medical practices were facing. We ran a business, it was called Pandemic Relief Supply. And we did more than $20 million of revenue, which gave us, capital to ultimately go back and start this new business. It was a very sort of pandemic sort of disruption event solving business, and it wouldn't stand, and it never was intended to stand the test of time. It was to have an impact on immediate problems for the short term. But that allowed us to sort of start Grapevine. Our first sort of funding partner was UPenn. Actually, they gave us this President's Innovation Prize and $250,000 of non-equity funding, introduced us to different VCs. We're now venture backed, raised close to $4 million total, and also have, self-funded to a huge extent.
Very nice. Very nice. And how many employees do you have now?
Yeah, we got 30 sort of full-time employees. Yeah, there's a couple contractors in there, but it's 30 team members here on a daily basis.
And you do your own tech development and technology stack and stuff?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we build all things in-house and to perfection.
Very good. And how about sales? How do you sometimes when people start companies, they sort of come from the tech sector, if you will, and then they have to sort of, okay, the product's finished, we got to go find some customers. How do you do that part?
Yeah, I think like you said, people come from the tech sector, or they want to be an entrepreneur, and they come up with their own new products, not even, tech, new product lines and whatever. And I think it's like running backwards ass first. I really think that in order to actually make a business, a successful business or a product, you need to start with a need and start with a real problem, and let the tech come and evolve around that problem and around that need. So fortunately or unfortunately, the problem was very clear, and it was a problem that was close to home, right? That I felt like my parents' lives were on the line during the pandemic, practicing patient care, and being exposed to this potentially lethal virus that no one knew much about. I was terrified. And it was sort of fear and a need and a want to protect my loved ones that led me to try to build something that would help. And we built something, and we rebuilt that thing, and we've continuously evolved around a problem that became more and more clear the more we sort of looked at it. And that led us to technology that we now have today. And yeah, there's, a few pieces of technology and different solutions that we're now building, different software products for different purposes. But we don't have a problem with sales. We have a problem with too much demand and an inability to fill that demand. Right now, we got 150 medical practices using Grapevine, and there's another 271 on a wait list that have signed up, pushing about $10 million of sort of spend through the platform, saving another 10 million annually, and another close to 100 million basically on this wait list that we hope to bring on over the next 6 months.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. One of the things you said reminded me of the fact that I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs I was in the venture capital business for a while. I was early stage, co-founded a venture capital firm. And I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who had a great invention looking for a problem to solve. And what you said was, let's find the problem first, and then let's figure out what we need to invent to solve it. So that was very well said.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So what were some of the big challenges in sort of getting this thing launched?
I think that, I mean, the point you just highlighted, starting with a problem and trying to find a solution that solves that problem. I mean, that's one challenge, but I think it's easy to on paper, right? Like once you've identified a problem, draw up on a whiteboard or whatever, a dozen different solutions. That's, not necessarily a challenge for us, but turning those solutions into adoptable and valuable tools for real people is a whole nother story, right? We restructured supply chains from a bird's eye view, and we're sure that we could save people 60% on the supply spend. The day that we actually launched our platform, which was, closer to 2 years ago for Grapevine, it was a huge bust. It did not work. People signed on. We were able to deliver real savings, but it was so different from what they were used to experiencing. The customer wasn't willing to sort of step into the future with us, or the future as we saw it, because there were parts of their daily habits, the parts of today that they truly valued, that they didn't want to lose, that were comfortable, for them. And, they talk about in these entrepreneurship books, meeting the customer where they're at. And I do think that's a hugely important thing. Even if you're starting with the problem and you come up with a solution, how do you make that solution easily palatable, for the person who's actually going to use it or derive real value for it? And we can look at numbers all day and quantitatively describe value, but value isn't just an adoption, and change of behavior isn't just a quantitative game. I mean, it's about ease and understanding the customers today, understanding what annoys them about their daily routine, and understanding what they appreciate about it. And when you understand those different things, you understand what they want to let go of, what they want to preserve. We call that moment 11:59 p.m. It's the moment that today meets tomorrow. It's the moment where the customer will take your hand and say, okay, your future is only one silly minute away from where I'm at in this moment. Let's leap into tomorrow together. And it's not a sales pitch. It's a thank you that, we end up getting from the customer. There's no convincing and debate. It's an obvious, yes, why wouldn't I do this? And, starting with the problem, building out a solution, and ultimately tailoring that solution to being an 11:59 moment for your customer. So they gasp and say, of course, we want to use this on a demo or a demonstration. I mean, that's exactly what we sort of strive for. And it's a continuous challenge because there's always new solutions that we're trying to, offer to these same people.
Right. I love your 11:59 moment. That's really a great way to sort of think about that and talk about that. So you mentioned that you had a waiting list of customers. So what's sort of the limiting factor for you guys right now from growing the business and scaling the business?
Well, you could probably tell I'm an impact first type of guy. And I know that we undercharge. I mean, it's free to use our platform, and it is such an obvious yes for people. And we're prioritizing, impact first, and consistent sort of, experience and value for the customer second. And as far as monetization, I mean, that definitely comes third. So I think part of it is figuring out the best way to turn growth into sustainable growth, right? Like turning customer value that we deliver, this is a challenge that we're facing now, into customer value that we deliver into, financial returns that can actually fuel our long-term growth. I mean, that's something that we are currently sort of working around and trying to figure out the best way to approach. The other side is I'm an engineer. That's my training. And I think that, sometimes when you hire people to scale your business or deliver the process, you got to train them over and over again. Each new person has to be taught the same things over and over again. And we're trying to basically deliver the same exact customer experience through like an automated toolbox. So we don't really need to hire and grow a massive sales team. With that said, I mean, there's an internal debate among our co-founders right now about whether we should hire people to work through this customer wait list, or if it should be an onboarding experience so seamless that they can derive that value themselves. Each new customer, each new business, directly from the wait list, they can achieve everything we want without hand-holding from a salesperson. And that's the world that I believe in. But maybe it's time to, put those dreams on hold and let people sort of hold the torch and guide them through the darkness here to get the value.
Right. That reminded me of back in the days when I worked for IBM Research. One of the sort of mentors I had always talked about the ultimate product being assuming it's a sophisticated product, right? The ultimate product is one in which you do not need a user's manual.
100%. I totally agree with that. Steve Jobs, I like reading about my idols and trying to take tidbits of their personality and fold them into my own character. And, that's a great tidbit. And, Steve Jobs would go into department stores and look at, I don't know what you call them, like the shit that you'd use in your kitchen. Oh, kitchen appliances. He would look at kitchen appliances because those are things that are so simple. They have a button, right? And how can we make software and computers, right, be as intuitive as a kitchen appliance? And Elon Musk is obsessed with toy making, right? Because toys deliver smiles to people's faces without a manual, right? And of course they're children, but some part of all of us is children. So how can we adopt the simplicity of toys or kitchen appliances to turn them into the adoption of complex, business-oriented solutions? It's hard.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the challenges that a lot of entrepreneurs have is sort of hiring people. How has that gone for you guys?
I think that's a huge part of the sort of scaling and working through that waitlist question that you asked earlier. I'm very picky about the people I work with. I'm very demanding about the people that we bring in. This is, my life, and it's solving problems for my loved ones. And I'm not going to let, anyone come in here dispassionately and, simply work a 40-hour week. That's not what I expect of our team. So yeah, it's hard for me to find people that I trust to grow this thing with. And we hire slow and we fire fast. We do need to grow faster, but I know that it needs to be the right people. And I mean, we have 3 new hires starting in the next month, and I'm hoping and praying that they'll stand the test of time and fit in well culturally. But we got a lot of excitement and people that want to work for us. But again, yeah, it's a matter of standards of people and building an A team that can attract and gravitationally pull in, more A players. And I think that, the first 100 employees are pivotal for what the next 1,000 employees look like. So yeah, we're going slow.
Do you have a particular process or set of characteristics you look for when you're considering hiring someone?
Yeah, I ask abstract questions about people's character and virtues. I think that's the most important thing. I don't look for skills. I think that you can learn skills through, the right combination of determination, ambition, the right outlook on the world and your life. So yeah, we prioritize values and character and virtues over any skills or experience. We think it's good to fold people in from other industries and other, other backgrounds, because that's a great way to make non-creative people more creative, right? It's just infusing sort of out of context information and letting it spark ideas that would never come if you were looking at the same content and information on a daily basis. So bringing in people from different backgrounds, bringing in people that, believe that there's a certain sort of philosophy that I look for, and it's this idea that life on Earth may be a flash in the pan and like a random miracle that occurred in this great, empty sort of lifeless universe. And that may be true. I don't know. But that doesn't mean that that's how the story needs to end. I don't think that there is purpose until people find a purpose in things. And I think that, humanity has a great opportunity to create purpose out of this random flash in the pan sort of event that is life on Earth. And people who think that life has, a very deep meaning and that it's an opportunity to create something that can outlast us, like those are some of the virtues I look for.
Excellent. So I think you mentioned you guys have around 30 employees right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a company grows from 3 or 4 people to 10 people to 30 people, all of a sudden, sort of, when there's 3 of you, you can have lunch together every day, and that serves as sort of your communication vehicle, and everybody knows everything that's going on. As the organization grows, all of a sudden, lines of communication can get noisy and sometimes not very efficient. Do you have a specific set of tools or techniques that you use to kind of make sure communications within the organization are working really well?
That's a good question. Yeah, we do have a couple of rituals, I guess you could call them, that we definitely practice to make sure communication is going pretty well. And I do think that alignment is very important. You got people pulling in opposite directions, they go nowhere. People pulling in the same direction, and you can move mountains. So one thing that we do to communicate and stay aligned is we basically do a daily stand up every single day. And I'm a part of that for each of the different teams. So we'll have like an engineering daily stand up. Everyone has 30 seconds to a minute to talk about what they're doing, to talk about challenges they're facing, if they're going to deliver their projects on a 2-week timeline or no. And everyone has projects on a 2-week timeline. And every 2 weeks we pivot and change the direction of your project based on, an aligned sort of mission and shared goal. And yeah, I go with our sort of leadership team between these sort of different departments or different groups. They do their stand-ups, takes 10 to 15 minutes, groups of 5 to 10 people, hear out what's going on, see where people are making mistakes and using their time unwisely, or where there's an opportunity to plug in something that we maybe already created, or a person who has expertise in a specific subject matter. And it's how we start every day. So we make sure that every day we're aligned and working in the right direction. We're all pulling in that right direction and moving together as a team.
Very good. Very nice. That's a great approach. Say, Luka, we've been chatting here for over 30 minutes now. Is there anything that I have not asked you or we've not talked about that you'd like to share with our listeners? I'm lost in our own conversation, and I didn't necessarily come here with intentions or an outcome I was looking for. So there's not anything in particular that I'm thinking to share, but happy to keep bouncing around ideas if you'd like. Yeah. Okay. Well, great. Hey, I've really appreciated you taking the time to be on the show. I know you entrepreneurs are busy and you have a lot of stuff to do. So thank you so much for being a guest.
Thank you for having me. It was a good time.
Well, Bela, that was fascinating. It really cool. What were your main takeaways from this?
Well, Mike, yeah, I really enjoyed my conversation with him as well. I think, first of all, it's see a problem, solve a problem. I mean, that's a common thread with entrepreneurs. By see, I mean, sometimes they visually see it, sometimes they experience it, Sometimes they hear about it from somebody else, but there's this opportunity recognition piece of saying, hey, there's an opening here. There's an opportunity to make something better, to make something more efficient, to take a existing product and improve it enough and significantly enough that people are willing to switch and go with your solution, product, or service. So I think that was one of the key takeaways for me. The other one was, as many businesses are, many new startups, they're in a crowded space. There's a lot of people who are doing supply chain management. There's big companies in the healthcare industry that do this supply chain management stuff. So it's a crowded space. So you have to figure out how you're going to elbow your way in to an opportunity and get customers to buy your product or service. I think that was a really good thing as well. And the other piece I thought was, he talked about how their first generation of their product or the first version of it didn't go over that great. It was challenging to switch to the product. They had some user interface problems, usability problems. So you have to expect that. So you got to build that into your sort of development cycle and development process. And I think that's a challenge that many first-time entrepreneurs don't recognize. They're so engrossed in their product, they say, of course, it's obvious how to use this thing. It's obvious how to do it. And customers don't necessarily see it that way. So you got to make sure you sort of build in that extra cycle into your development timeline. I had a question for you, Mike. What did you think of Luka's 1159 concept?
I loved it, Bela. I mean, this is meeting the customer where they're at. Those are his words, and those are words that I teach my students when I teach entrepreneurship. And it is the idea that customers typically, don't want to change. You don't want to be trying to change massive amounts of behaviors, even if you're saving them a lot of money. People are used to doing things a certain way. And I really like how he used this metaphor in this kind of way to get them to adopt. He met them most of the way, right? He redesigned his original kind of idea to make it more aligned with how these offices would purchase their medical supplies. And then he just had to, instead of having them cross a big gap, have them cross a little gap where they could kind of take them by the hand and walk them across. So it wasn't such a big shift. I thought that was really great and really insightful for a young entrepreneur.
Yeah, I agree.
And,
I was going to say that people don't realize how difficult it is to get people to change behavior. So if your product requires a behavioral change from a user, in other words, they're doing something a certain way today, and now they're going to start using your product and they have to change how they do something, there's a big resistance to that. And one of the reasons there's a big resistance is because in the beginning, it's actually going to be more work for the user because they're not familiar with it, right? Even though they may be currently doing something with an inefficient process and your product or service is more efficient, in the beginning, it's probably going to be more work for them than what they were doing. So you got to help them get over that hump. And I think that's a key insight that a lot of entrepreneurs have to figure out how to take that pain, that learning cycle. It's like switching from a Windows computer to an Apple computer, or an iPhone to an Android phone. One may be more efficient for you than the other, but man, that first week is just a freaking pain in the butt because everything works differently. So I think that's another sort of interesting key takeaway.
Yeah. And, this comes from something that we see a lot of where he was trying to transfer his experience as a shopper, right, to this experience that doctors' offices have. And he knew about this. He, I think, learned a lot about the context from the, dinner table conversations with his parents. And I'm sure he did his research for this and talked to a lot of users. But it was saying, okay, I have these cool concepts that make sense from just a normal e-commerce trend, standpoint, from a regular, typical B2C user, and transfer this into a B2B setting. So I thought that was really cool. And I thought that transition was something that a lot of entrepreneurs go through. They say, here's an idea that would work for me, but not always totally realizing that how that works for you is very different than how that works for the people who are actually going to buy your product, right, or your service in this case. And he did a really nice job of figuring that out early. Remember, he said he struggled early, right? And he was able to iterate and to figure out a way to close the gap, and to, like you said, is to walk that customer that last little bit over that line to get them to change over and use their system. So I thought that was really neat. What lessons do you see in terms of, for entrepreneurs that are interested in starting a business? I mean, this is the classic, case of a college student. It was COVID, right? I love this story about it was the pandemic and they were shut in their room, him and the roommates, and they found a solution to a real-time problem that kept them busy, and engaged, and probably learned way more than he would have in school about business, and that was cool. So, I mean, this is a neat story. There's lots of, I think, of our listeners that are in a similar situation, maybe, right? They want to be an entrepreneur, maybe, and don't know how to start. What lessons do you see here in terms of starting a business?
Yeah, I like the COVID piece as well, right? It's sort of like when one door closes for you, oftentimes another door will open up. And sometimes it's not obvious what that other door is. So you may have to sort of try a bunch of doors to see which door is unlocked that you can walk through and enter. So I thought that was sort of neat. And that sort of goes to the things I was saying earlier about opportunity recognition. The other piece that I thought was interesting in our conversation and was this notion of making your product so simple to use, you don't need a user's manual. Right? I can remember in my early part of my career, the user's manuals for various different pieces of equipment that I designed and developed, as well as the companies I worked for, was like a 3-ring binder with 400 pages in it. And I can remember, this is nuts. I gotta read all this stuff just to figure out how to use it. It needs to be much more intuitive than that. And that's a place where I give Steve Jobs a lot of credit, right? He figured out how to take this very complex thing that you hold in your hand and make it so that you could figure out how to use it without reading a manual. And I think that's one of the key takeaways for any entrepreneur, for any type of product or service, et cetera. If you need a help desk, figure out how to get rid of your help desk. That's what you should be focused on, figuring out how you don't need a help desk. And I don't mean by using AI. I mean AI answers the phone instead of a person. That's not what I mean. I mean, make your product in such a way that people do not have to open up a manual or, click on some user's manual that's now on the device itself. I mean, that's not all that helpful. So I think that's a big challenge. It's something that we still struggle with many products. And I think that's something that we oftentimes don't focus enough on as entrepreneurs.
Yeah. A good analogy to this is I had a wall clock once that sat on the wall, right? And just simple, it tells time, right? Does it well. But when it was time to change the time, it was almost impossible to figure out when you took the clock off the wall, how to fix it, right? And finally broke, and I was happy to get rid of it because it was always a pain and it was just very unintuitive. And there was a user's manual for a wall clock, and a wall clock shouldn't have a user's manual. And now I have one that sits on the wall and I don't have to touch it. It's got a little solar panel on the top of it, so it doesn't even have a battery, and it changes itself automatically when the time changes, right? So there's no need for help, right? And I think that's a great example of a design that a product is designed that not only does it, like you said, not need a user manual, but you don't need a help desk either. It just works. Cool. I thought of something else about this, Bela. I mean, this is an entrepreneur that's really, he said, his target market is really kind of the smaller medical offices. It's not B2B, it's E2E, right? It's entrepreneur to entrepreneur. He came up with an idea and a business model where he's providing an incredibly valuable service, or what it sounds like to me is an incredibly valuable service to other entrepreneurs. So I thought that was cool. So I think we made up a new term here, E2E. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great concept, Mike, because I think the reason I like that and I feel that it's important is because the sales process is different. If you're trying to sell something to a Fortune 5,000 company with hundreds of employees, that's a very different sales process than trying to sell something to a 4-person company or a 10 or 20 person company, right? A small business, less than 50 people, I think is the definition of a small business. It's a very different sales process. It's a very different threshold that I think you need to sort of bring it across. Because think of it this way, right? If I'm a small doctor's office and I currently have a way of sort of managing my supply chain, however I do that, and I'm going to switch to your product, if your product doesn't work, I'm screwed, right? I'm out of business. I mean, not literally out of business. Patients will keep coming, but I won't have stuff to do to provide service to my customers. So don't underestimate the potential risk that your customer is undertaking by switching to your product or service. And you have to figure out how to make that risk go practically to zero, because you can't let it's like, I can't close the office for a day, right? So you got to think about that in your product or service. And most of the times, particularly in these small size businesses, think about a cash register system for a restaurant, right? And that's what you're selling. And you're going to sell this new one that does inventory and cash management and order placing and all that stuff for a restaurant. And you turn it on day one and it doesn't work. What's the guy in the restaurant going to do? So you really got to think that through, how to minimize the risk for your customer when they adapt your product.
Yeah. But I'm thinking about it. We've had a lot of, over the past 175 episodes before this one, we've had several entrepreneurs that have exactly this business model, right? I mean, different industries, different contexts, but they built a business helping other small businesses or helping other entrepreneurs. So this E to E model, this might be an interesting, maybe we write a little short book, or maybe we put together a little white paper, or we maybe put together some of these podcasts that we've done into one and then kind of do a wrapper around it. So, hey, if you're interested in being an entrepreneur, one thing to think about is creating a business, right? A platform business or a service business or whatever, with your clients being entrepreneurs. It's hard because sometimes they don't have a lot of money in the beginning, right? But if you're going to that stage after they've launched and after they have a customer base, right? They have money and they have problems to be solved, like these small doctor's offices. So I think that's an interesting idea. Maybe we should file away for the next year or so if we get a little free time. What do you think? Time to wrap this up?
Yep. Let's wrap this one up, Mike. Let's call it a day.
All right, listeners, thanks for yet another 45 minutes of your time spent with us, and we hope that you found this episode as interesting and thought-provoking as we did. And as always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike@gmail.com.
Hey, and please follow the podcast if you haven't already done so. Give us a review. And also, the podcast is now also available on YouTube. So you can find us there as well. Just search for the Unconventional Path. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you soon, Mike.
Thanks, Bela. Thanks to you, and thanks to Luka Yancopoulos and Grapevine. Check them out if you're in this medical space. But that's it from over here in Münster, Germany, and we'll see everybody next time.